Hi, everyone. Welcome to Pilates Elephants. I'm your host for today, Heath Lander, and I am very excited to say that I'll be interviewing the one and only Raphael Bender, who's normally your host. So we've flipped the tables because we've heard repeatedly that people are really interested to hear Raf's origin story and where he came from and the journey that he took to be where he and Breathe Education is today. And so that's the purpose of today's session. And Raph, I'm going to throw to you and ask you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself. Welcome.
Hey, it's interesting to be here with you. My name's Raph. I am a Pilates instructor. I'm an exercise physiologist. And I really don't actually instruct Pilates or teach exercise or do exercise physiology these days. I teach people to be Pilates instructors, and most importantly, I teach people who are already Pilates instructors to be better Pilates instructors. So, and I've got a business. I'm based here in Melbourne, Australia. I live with my wife and daughter, and work from home. And I basically don't leave the house from 1 week to the next. So that's me.
That's it. Okay. All right. Great. So you have been a Pilates instructor. How long ago did you come across Pilates? What was that? When did you first meet the Pilates?
Like you, I guess I don't want to tar you with the same brush, but I feel like I kind of not wasted, but I basically faffed around from my 20s and 30s. Like I was a musician and a martial arts practitioner for a couple of decades, and that's basically what I did with my youth. It was fun at the time, and I learned a lot of amazing things, met a lot of amazing people, but then I got to, I don't know, my mid-30s and realised, oh, fuck, I'm like not actually young anymore, and I literally don't have any qualifications, and I'm actually don't have any like significant job experience because I've just played in bands in 2-bit sleazy dives my whole life, and taught martial arts for like $5 a class, and I'm staring down the barrel of like shit. All my friends are, well, not all my friends, but a lot of people that I went to school with are now like in proper jobs, making proper money with mortgages and all of that. And I'm still riding on a concession fare on the bus, not really knowing where my next dollar's coming from. And that was great when I was 25, but all of a sudden I realized like, oh crap, I'm seriously not very employable. And I don't want to keep working in like as a waiter, because I can't remember who it is, but the comedian who says when someone heckles him and he says, oh, in the audience, and he says, oh, what do you do for a living? And the person says, oh, I'm an arts graduate. And he says, oh, I'll say to you what I say to all arts graduates. I'll have a cappuccino, please. And so that was me. I didn't have a degree in arts, but I was a musician. I was an artist, but that's a fancy way of saying I worked in a cafe, for a decade.
And explored some hobbies. Yeah.
Right. To support my expensive musical equipment habit.
Yeah.
So I got to 35 and I realized, oh, like, fuck, I really need to do something about having a career, having some qualifications. So at that point I went and I decided I had a martial arts school in Sydney, which is a very grandiose term for like renting a sweaty, smelly room at the back of Newtown Gym 2 nights a week and teaching a bunch of people for $5 a class how to do martial arts. And then my wife and I decided we wanted to open a yoga and Pilates and martial arts studio because we realized that martial arts was like such a tiny niche thing that would never appeal to a wide range of people. And actually, moreover, we were more interested in the exercise side of things than we like. I was actually found myself teaching the martial arts and I got more and more excited about teaching the warm-ups and the conditioning part of it and less excited about teaching the fighting part of it. And so I found this amazing place in Sydney called Elixir Health Clubs, which is still going. And this was like in 2004 or something like that, and they had a yoga and Pilates focus. So they didn't have like all of the traditional gym, like group exercise, like pump and spin classes and all of that. They just had yoga and Pilates. And then they had a whole bunch of gym equipment out on the floor. And so I thought, oh, this is brilliant. I'm going to go and work here and learn how to run a business. And so I did go and work there, and I learned a lot of stuff about how to run a business. They put me on the sales team. I didn't know shit. I didn't know anything. Like, I was literally just a musician who knew nothing about nothing, but I just got lucky, and the owner was very friendly, and he saw something in me, and I got a job. And he said, I'm going to give you a job. And I said, doing what? And he said, I don't know, we'll find you something. And so he put me on the sales team, and I just didn't know my ass from my elbow, didn't know anything. And he taught me how to sell. I got good at it because he was a really good teacher, and he was really good at it. And it was a great product. And then I was, after some time, I was running the sales team. I was leading the sales team. And one of my friends who worked there, they did a Pilates instructor training program for Stop Pilates at there. And my friend Michelle, she ran the program, and we were having coffee across the road in the park one day, and she just said, oh, look, I'm really in the shit. Can you help me out? I've got this course that's starting this weekend, and I've had someone pull out, and I don't have my minimum numbers, and I've got egg on my face. Will you please come and just be a warm body in the room in the course? I'm like, oh, for fuck's sake. You don't want me to, do I have to?
Just to clarify that, you'd started working at a Pilates and yoga facility without any official Pilates or yoga training. You were on the sales team selling something, which you then got an opportunity to go and learn the how of.
Right. So I was actually, I was on the sales team. I was actually also teaching martial arts at this place. We're running our martial arts classes out of there after hours and stuff. So it was, I was kind of, I was excited about the whole yoga and Pilates things. And actually at that time I was practicing yoga. I used to practice Ashtanga. Never was great at it, but did it for a couple of years with reasonable dedication, like 4 or 5 days a week. Could touch my toes. And stuff. But, so at that point I didn't really know anything. Yeah, could touch my toes.
Good. Yep. Which notably you can't anymore. Is that right?
Yeah, at the moment, give me a few warm-ups, I can reach them. So I didn't teach Pilates, and I really wasn't that interested in teaching Pilates. I was interested in teaching martial arts, and I liked yoga, and I was interested in opening a business that had Pilates and yoga and martial arts, but not because I loved Pilates, just because I thought, oh, well, that's kind of a cool thing. They go together.
Yeah. Seems to be part of the Venn diagram of wellness. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I was like, eye roll, fuck, give up my weekend, come and do this fucking stupid Pilates course as a favor to Michelle. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do it, but you fucking owe me big time, for doing this. And so I, drag my feet there with my, eyes rolling back in my head till you can see just the whites. And I'm like, so unenthusiastic about it. And I rock up, and within 5 minutes of the course starting, I was like, oh, this is cool. This is really fucking cool. And I just loved it. I loved it. And, I've interviewed shitloads of people on this podcast where people tell me their origin story, and they had a similar experience where they were like, I've never enjoyed exercise, but then I found Pilates, and oh my God, it was like, it really resonated. And for me, that was the case. Like when I was converted, I had like a Damascene conversion.
Okay, so let's double click on that a little bit. This is a Stott Pilates course, I gather?
Yeah, this is Intensive Mat Plus. So this is like an 8-day, 6 hours a day. You learn the 40 mat work exercises, or whatever number, 72 mat work exercises, I think, from memory.
Yeah.
And then you learn posture analysis, and you do anatomy review, and so just all the basics that you learn.
Yeah. So when was the mind blow emoji moment? Was it when you did the 100 and you were like, wow, nothing could be this hard? Or was it a combination of the movements being different? Or was it the postural stuff? Was it the
I think for me, it was the precision that I had picked up a personal training certification along the way. Before that, And, so I sort of knew the names of a few muscle groups, and I could throw the word scapula around, without really being super clear on what it meant. But, I knew some of the terms. But just like the precision of the language and the precision of the movement, and just all of it really just, I thought, oh, this is really like, I don't know, just the knowledge of it, and I guess the precision is the thing I really put my finger on that really blew me away. And this was like 18 years ago now, so it's hard for me to remember. But I remember the sensation, the motion, the experience of being like, oh, this is really cool. I didn't realize what I was missing out on, until I tried this. This was awesome.
Yeah. Okay.
So, yeah. So, I went, in 5 minutes, I went from like, oh, fuck, do I have to be here, to like, oh, this is amazing. I'm so happy. And then I did all of the courses. I did all of the Stop Pilates courses. I suddenly realized how lucky I was working at this place where I could do the Stop Pilates training for like basically nothing. Like, I think they gave me a 90% discount or something to do the training. So I got to do all of the Stop Pilates instructor training courses. Like, I did the mat, the reformer, the Cadillac chair, the barrels, the advanced courses, injuries and special populations. And, I just became obsessed with it and started teaching. And, my first classes were shit and all the rest of it. But I got reasonably good reasonably quickly, because I had a background in teaching movement, and I was teaching reformer classes. I was teaching mat classes. I loved it. And, fast forward a couple of years, my wife Julie and I moved back to Melbourne, which is 600 miles south of Sydney, because this is basically where most of our family was. We were about to have a baby, and we thought, oh, what a great opportunity. We'll open up our own place. Because there was nowhere really like Elixir in Melbourne. So we partnered up with a bunch of friends, opened a place called Breathe Wellbeing, and which was just a yoga and Pilates studio. So by this time, I'd let go of the martial arts thing. It was just Pilates, and I wasn't even into yoga anymore. It was just all Pilates all the time. So we opened up a Pilates and yoga studio, and yoga, because some of the people we were opening the business with were yogis. And also it just seemed like, oh yeah, Pilates and yoga, they just go together, like wine and cheese or whatever. So we opened up that, and, ran that business for about a decade, had lots of ups and downs, lots of trials and tribulations, lots of terrible mistakes, lost lots of money, made lots of money, learned lots of stuff. But I guess that, pertinent to this story, around about 2013, like I had this, well, actually as we opened the studio, I also was so into this Pilates like teaching journey. I actually went across to Canada, to Toronto, at Stop Pilates HQ there, in Yonge Street or Boulevard, and studied all the instructor trainer courses. So I did their full instructor trainer certification. I went across a bunch of times, like 4 or 5 times, to Toronto, and studied with them there. And
so these are the courses that take you from being a comprehensive instructor to teach the general public to a comprehensive trainer of instructors.
Right. Yep. And I was, very fortunate to be mentored by Melanie Byford Young, who was she was a master instructor trainer for Stop Pilates at the time. She wrote their rehab course, and we hit it off, and I went out a bunch of times. I can't remember, but 3 or 4 times at least, I went and stayed with her in Seattle, Washington, where she lives, and just rode shotgun with her on sessions for a couple of weeks at a time, and would basically just sit in with her doing heaps of client sessions. And I co-taught a bunch of courses with her, like rehab courses and injuries and special populations courses and stuff. So I really got to kind of sit at her feet and, absorb her kind of knowledge and teaching skills.
Okay, so just a deep dive. I think there's a fork in the road that we've just swept over there. At the beginning of the journey, you were doing let's say, general movement, like group yoga and group martial arts. Then you discovered group Pilates, and you had your eyes were white. The scales were lifted from your eyes when you started doing the mat work, which is essentially general for the general population. But you've just segued into talking about how you were mentored by Melody Byford-Young. She's the head honcho of the rehab branch of Stop Pilates. She's very well known for that. And when I came across you, your focus was very much on pain, rehabilitation, and injuries. Can you just talk a little bit about the transition from teaching a heap of reformer and mat classes work? When did the interest in people's pain and rehab come in, or was it always just baked in?
I think it was always baked in to a certain extent. Like when I was even teaching the Kung Fu classes, the martial arts I used to teach, I was trying to figure out like what's the common element between my students. And the one thing I could pick up that they all had was some form of back pain. And so I was like, oh, that's interesting. And so I always had been interested in that, but didn't really know anything about it. And the Stop Pilates courses kind of whetted my appetite for that, because they kind of tantalizingly talk about, posture and correcting muscle balances and things like that, and kind of imply that helps back pain, but it doesn't. There wasn't anything that was kind of meaty or satisfying enough for me to draw a straight line from like, okay, here's how you solve low back pain for people. I didn't feel like I understood that. And Melanie is just incredibly intelligent, learned, well-read, articulate, a great teacher, and very brilliant clinician, working with clients. And I ran into her. I can't remember exactly how. I think it might have been at the Stop Pilates conference or something, the Licensed Training Center conference, I can't remember. I bumped into her as part of the Stop Pilates world anyway. And she was a big cheese at that time in the Stop Pilates universe. She's since no longer affiliated with them. She has, I'm not sure, I'm not sure if she's affiliated with them or not, but I know she doesn't, write their programs anymore. And she has her own studio and she does her own thing, I think. But at that time she was kind of a big star in the Stop Pilates universe, and I was kind of had stars in my eyes, and I was like, oh, Melanie Byford-Young, you're amazing. And I still think that. I mean, she still is amazing. So I kind of just followed her around and said, will you teach me? And she was kind enough to agree. And so I basically just, I flew her out to Australia once, and she came out by herself once, and I flew over to Seattle a bunch of times and hung out with her and her husband, Kevin, my wife, Jules, my daughter, Bintu. We've spent 4th of July with them a couple of times. Like, we've become actually quite good friends. So I learned heaps from her, just like sitting, basically not literally, but pretty close to literally sitting at her feet as she taught courses, as she, worked with clients, so I was, that was a really formative, experience for me. Yeah, and she's a physio. She doesn't practice as a physio, but she's trained as a physio. And so she has like voluminous knowledge about anatomy and biomechanics and rehabilitation and stuff. So she was like the Encyclopedia Britannica when such a thing existed.
And this is all happening in the mid to late 1990s?
No, this is the early, late aughts, so 2009, 2010, 11, 12, something like that.
All right.
That period.
And so then within the context of the history of Pilates, what you just said about Melanie was pretty high value knowledge, right? The anatomy, postural awareness, all of that. That was the zeitgeist for the industry at the time.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I learned heaps of that from her, and that's where I got, she really sparked my interest to learn more about that sort of stuff. And then again, I had all this knowledge now, and I knew all the muscles and I knew all the different fibers of psoas and, all the rest of it. But I still just had these Stop Pilates certifications, which were great, but, they're not a degree. And I felt like, I'm still I'm close to 40 now, and I don't have, like, I've basically just got kind of like what we'd call in Australia, I know, vocational qualification, something that's like, I don't know. It didn't feel to me like I had a qualification that was commensurate with the amount of knowledge I had. I felt like I had a lot of knowledge that wasn't reflected in the qualification. Yeah. So I was actually inspired by John Gary, who I had also become friends with as part of the Whole Stop Pilates universe. And John Gary was, if anything, a bigger star even than Melanie Byford Young. It was like Elvis of Pilates. And John, if you're listening, I love you and you're fucking awesome. And so John had gone back to university, and this was, roughly that kind of 2010-ish period. He'd gone back to university to do a kinesiology degree, or his master's or something, that's in America, that's why they call it exercise science. And that really inspired me. I thought, fuck, he's a guy in his 40s, top of his game, world famous, teaching fitness, like everyone thinks he's awesome, and he's going back to learn more, about what he already is a genius at. So that inspired me, because I was in my early 40s at the time, and I thought, so that inspired me to go back to study exercise science at the age of 42, whilst running the studio full time. So I did a Bachelor of Exercise and Sports Science. I'd studied that full time. In fact, I did it and I had a 6-year-old daughter. So thank God for my wife, who just, did like 99% of the parenting, at this point. But yes, so I was running the studio. We had like 40 staff, 2 studios, 1,500 clients a week coming through the doors, like 120 classes a week. And I studied the Bachelor of Exercise and Sports Science. It's a 3-year degree. I did it in 2 years. So that was just an insanely busy, time for me, and not an experience I would care to repeat. But I'm really glad that I did it. I don't think I slept more than 6 hours for the whole 2 years, 6 hours in a row. It was like, I didn't used to be when I was a musician, but my wife actually, I think, has taught me to be extremely organized. And like when we first got married, I was always losing my wallet and my keys because I'd put them down in a different place every time and just forget. And she taught me that this crazy rule that you just always put the things in the same place, and then you know where they are. And I was like, that's crazy.
Oh, Jules. Yeah.
So like, I haven't lost my wallet in over a decade. It's like, I don't even understand how people lose their wallets these days. It's like, but I used to lose it all the time. So I've definitely learned a few things. And Jules, my wife, taught me a lot about being organized and systematized. And I then kind of took the ball and ran with it on that. And so when I studied, I was like, I just went to a lot of degrees, and maybe people listening to this can identify, like, I think a lot of Pilates people that I've met are kind of like this, that basically I looked at, all of the things I had to do in a semester. So I sort of like printed out, okay, here are the assignments that are due. This one's 5,000 words. This one's 3,000 words. Here's the textbook chapters I have to read. This chapter's 22 pages. This chapter's 48 pages. I've got a week to read it. So basically mapped out all of the things I had to do, and when the dates they were due. And I knew, okay, and basically divided it up by every day I had to read 22 pages, right, is what I remember, right? And then I timed how long it took me to read a page, and these are like dense pages of small writing on a big book, and the shortest word is 3 syllables, and so you often have to read the paragraph like 4 times, and then you're going like, oh, what the fuck does that mean? So it takes a long time to read it. And so I figured, I basically just timed myself and then timed how long does it take me to write an essay, etc. And then I just figured out, okay, well, I need to spend 4 hours per week writing essays. I need to spend 2 hours per day reading. I need to spend, I just diarized it. I just diarized it all. And, so my day was like just rigidly scheduled, and this is on top of teaching like 15 classes a week, plus running a $2 million a year business, plus, really doing 1% of the parenting for a 6-year-old. So that was I mean, it was exciting. I was learning stuff. I felt, really great about all of that, but it was like, oh my God, just a blur of weariness and fatigue and just never having 2 seconds to relax or read a book or go on social media or watch a movie or any of that. You never went out to dinner. Like just study, work, sleep, repeat for 2 years.
And so at the end of those 2 years, you had an exercise physiology degree, or was that, and then the master's followed that?
Yes, I had an exercise science degree, and then I did the master's straight after that. So I applied for the master's in clinical exercise physiology at a different uni, got into that. That was an 18-month degree. I did it in 12 months. And again, just applied the same process, basically just mapped out exactly, okay, what's due, how many words, how many pages, how many chapters, and just mapped it all out and diarized it like a maniac and just pushed through it. And so this was like, I was so not excited by all of the work, but I was excited by the learning, and I was excited by meeting people, and like going up and doing the labs and stuff was really exciting. And but like that whole 3 years is a real blur, and was like, oh my God, it wasn't fun, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And did it achieve the purpose? You set out to, you said you felt you had X amount of knowledge that was more than your qualifications reflected. Did you feel well prepared for the study? Did it level you up? Did you come out knowing more? Did you come out feeling you didn't learn a great deal?
All of the above. Like I felt like, I think a lot of people who were self-educated, because I had read a lot, I was inspired by Melanie. Anything she like casually mentioned, I would like go and buy the book and read it, so I'd done a lot of reading, but it had been very kind of ad hoc and sporadic, so I knew heaps about certain things and nothing about other things. I had real massive gaps. So my knowledge wasn't broad, but it was very deep in sort of certain random areas that I'd had inspiration in. So one thing that I got from one of the several things I got from the degrees was I basically started from A and went to Z, like I learned all of the things, so we started with, the hip bone connects to the thigh bone, and we went all the way through, to what is a nerve impulse and reading ECG, all the rest of it. And, so I felt like I filled in a lot of gaps, and I felt like, and now there's always more to learn. And I know 2% of what there is to know about anatomy and physiology, but I feel like after those degrees, I felt, I have a solid foundation. There are no glaring gaps, right? And It's like I could learn more about everything, but I feel like I have a broad, consistent sort of knowledge base that don't have any massive blind spots in those areas. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that was awesome. And I'm really grateful for that. And I think like one of the great insights I had, as I was studying, this was like a second or third year, was it's like, because I studied online, right? I did mine by distance. And so I listened to all the lectures as a recording, and I handed in my essays, got feedback from my tutors, lecturers, is written feedback. And I went up for a lab, like for a week, once a year, where we did all of our physiology experiments and tested blood lactate and VO2 max and stuff like that. But basically I was studying at a self-paced course. And so I had this realization like a couple of years in, basically they're just making me read these textbooks, right? I'm just literally just reading the textbooks and then writing essays on what I read in the textbooks and doing exams based on what I read in the textbooks. I'm like, I could have bought the fucking textbook for $200, right? And just read it and got the same education instead of paying it was like $30,000 for those 2 degrees, right? That I'm like, fuck. I could have just got this for $250, But then I realized that, well, I'd had 42 years before I went to uni, but I never read the textbook, right? And I thought, why was that? It's like, because now I have this massive fucking pressure that if I don't read it by week 9, I'll fail the exam, right? So basically what you get, one of the massive things you get in the uni is like they just basically put massive pressure on you to read the stuff and learn the stuff in a systematic way that you could, in theory, do by yourself, but let's face it, 99% of us don't do it, because you open up a textbook and you go, fuck, this is dense and hard work. I think I've read for 10 minutes. I'll just have a Netflix break for a minute. Whereas when you know that you've got to read 2 hours a day and you've got to be at work in 2.5 hours, it's like, you've got to read it now, So basically, it's they just make you read the stuff. There's nothing magical about university. It's just, they just force you to do the work.
Yeah. So you described that you felt, the process of doing those degrees joined dots and gave you there's more to learn, but it gave you a sense of a more comprehensive view of the landscape, and that you didn't have any glaring blind spots. And then you just reflected that, what you got for your money was accountability. That, you were forced to do something that you could have done voluntarily. And then the other bit is someone was telling you the sequence of the content and do this in this order. And as you do that, your knowledge will layer up effectively rather than go here because that's interesting. Oh, now that's interesting over there. Oh, now. So there's some kind of structure to it, which maybe we call a curriculum or whatever. And that would be the other thing that I guess maybe is a blind spot for you now, that you take for granted that someone was doing that for you.
Yeah, I think there's a double-edged sword to that. I think having a curriculum can be incredibly powerful. And obviously I believe that because that's what we do at Breathe Education. But I think there's a misconception that is super common in educators that you have to start with the sort of super basics before you can, start to comprehend more complex concepts. And I feel that, having sort of done it both ways, like with Melanie, I learned to sprint before I could crawl. I learned the freaking different layers and muscle fiber composition of the deep fibers of psoas versus the superficial fibers of the psoas before I even knew some of the super basic stuff, like what are the bones of the ankle joint, so I learned some super in-depth stuff, but had massive holes in some of the basics, before uni. And then at uni, I went through this, like you say, a structured process. So you learn the basics and you learn the structure and blah, 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 and it also scaffolds up. But I think at my uni, they did a pretty good job, but I think a lot of times, educators tend to curate or protect students from more complex ideas. And I know that as we teach, for instance, in our diploma, the biomechanics of the spine, right? We teach them pretty freaking in depth, the biomechanics of the intervertebral disc in flexion versus neutral, right? So we look at the forces on the disc wall and how they're transferred from the nucleus to the disc wall. It's pretty detailed stuff that is fourth year university level stuff, right?
Right.
And in fact, to be honest, I think it's more postgraduate sort of thesis level stuff. I didn't even learn that at university in my 4-year degree, but our students have no trouble with it, right? I rarely have to give any corrective feedback on that assignment where people are talking about this, they get it. So I think yes, structure is really important. And why do they get it? Because I think we've scaffolded them up to it. But I think that we'd managed to do that in a couple of months, where often the assumption is you need 4 or 5 years to get to that point. And I think that's not true.
Yep. All right, great. So you've done this undergrad, now postgraduate exercise physiology study. And how did you feel when you finished, apart from relieved?
Really freaking relieved. But I felt empowered. I felt like I was legit. I felt like I had a real qualification, and not that Stop Pilates is not a real qualification. And that's not what I mean. I feel like I had a qualification that you could show your parents and they'd be like, oh, that's cool. you know, and, you know, maybe there are parents out there that think differently, but, I just felt like, you know, you could tell the taxi driver on the way to the airport and they'd be like, yeah, I know what that is.
A master's degree from a university has more social capital than a certification from a private provider.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, great. What did that do for you? What was next? What emerged for you after that?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, this was when I was so biomechanical at this point. Like I was biomechanics and anatomy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I mean, you and I wrote an anatomy textbook. You illustrated it and I wrote the words with Nicole, who's also on our team. And, you know, we were so into the anatomy, you know, and, you know, I still am. I mean, anatomy is so exciting and interesting and fascinating. But we were just like everything about the way we taught was anatomy, and we were teaching instructors at this point. And we were, you know, basically we were teaching all of the things about anatomy. And, we were overwhelming the shit out of our poor students, just, you know, vomiting anatomy word salad at them the whole time. And also, you know, what I was experiencing was like, I knew all of the things, like I did all of the Stuart McGill courses and I did all of the core activation courses and all of the posture courses and all of the multifidus recruitment things. And I had all of the blood pressure cuffs to test people's transversus activation and anatomy trains courses. Like I did all of that stuff. And I could tell you, I could go on for hours about the posterior oblique sling and blah, blah, blah. But still, a significant portion of my clients didn't get better. And so I was seeing these clients and they come in with pain and I'll go, oh, no problem. You know, I'll do your assessment. Oh, your neutral spine's out, or your posterior oblique sling's not firing, or your transversus is overactive or underactive or whatever. No problem. We'll fix that. And then sometimes we'd fix it and the client would be like, oh my God, you've fixed me. That's amazing. And sometimes they'd be like, yeah, no, it still hurts. You know, and I'd be like, but I just did the exact same thing to somebody else and they had the exact same problem and that fixed them. So why didn't it fix this person? And I just couldn't see why, like, well, two things. One, I couldn't see why sometimes someone would come in with the exact same symptoms and he would do the exact same thing and then it just wouldn't work. Whereas on the other person it did work. And it's just like, I don't fucking get it. And then the second thing was I had all of these different things going around in my head. So I had, like the McGill stuff, which is all about neutral spine, right? So, then it would, you know, client would come in and I would do an assessment. How can they keep the neutral spine? How can they brace their core? How can they dissociate their limbs? And I had the anatomy trained stuff. So I'd be like, okay, client comes in, they've got a pain. I would assess their whole system. How's their dorsiflexion? How's their craniocervical flexion? Has, you know, all of that stuff. Look at their, you know, contralateral lat to opposite glute connection, all of, you know, and evaluate that and, you know, start to increase or decrease activation of different areas accordingly, right? To correct whatever imbalances I detected. Or I also had this, transverse abdominis, multifidus pelvic floor, you know, kind of core spinal stability model, right? So a client would come in with back pain. I would assess their ability to control, segmentally stabilize their lumbar spine at the affected segment and assess their ability to activate their transverse abdominis, their multifidus. Okay. I couldn't assess their pelvic floor, obviously, but would, you know, talk to them about it. And so, you know, so there was, and I had half a dozen other models. I had trigger points, so many different, you know, things that we could, you know, work through. And each of these was a different kind of model or map of how to help someone with pain, right? And it's like, well, I've got freaking 10 different models I can use. So, you know, client walks into a bar, you know, which model do you use, right? Do I use the neutral spine model or do I use trigger points or do I use anatomy trains? Do I use core activation? You know, what do I use? Posture, you know, like there's so many different, you know, and Shirley Simon's like movement system impairment syndromes model. Like we had so many different models. Like, well, which fucking model do I use? How do I know which model to use with each person? I was just like confused as shit. I knew too much. And I knew all of the things, but I didn't have any system. I didn't see how any of it fit together. Right? Can you do neutral spine and like anatomy trains at the same time? Or do they cancel each other out? You know, like So it's like, well, when do you use one and when do you use the other one? Right. And why does it work sometimes and not work other times? And how can you tell? Like I was just, so it was kind of like I knew like 100 times more than I used to know, but I was actually just more confused in many ways.
Those different models, did they come from the university study or a combination of university study and self-interest?
Yeah, combo.
Combination.
So, yeah.
And so
I'd done a lot of, like, I flew around the world. I mean, I was lucky enough. I had a business. I had some money, flew around the world, studied with different, I studied with, like, not formally studied at university, but like did courses with like Stuart McGill, Paul Hodges, Peter O'Sullivan, lots of different people teaching these different systems,
Yep. So you're ending up with this kind of patchwork quilt of models of ways of working with people with pain. Pain's becoming more and more of a focus for you. Like you're more and more interested in looking for this common denominator that you kind of were sniffing around back in martial arts days of like everyone seems to have lower back pain, all these models. And there's a sense of when are these things going to either coalesce into one unifying theory that makes sense, or when am I going to work out which one actually works?
When's it going to make sense? For fuck's sake, like how many more things do I have to learn, before it makes sense?
Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking, like, for fuck's sake, I've got a fucking master's degree, and I've done all of the extra reading, I still don't get it. And when I say I don't get it, I mean, like, I could recite all of the freaking actions of all of the muscles and all of the blah, 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 right? But so I knew the words, right? But I didn't get it. Like I could say the words, like I had learned, if you said to me, oh, what's the action of TFL? I could go, hip flexion, abduction, internal rotation, knee external rotation, tension's the IT. I could tell you all of the things, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you came to me and said, why does my TFL hurt? I'd be like, fuck, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know. Why does my TFL hurt when I do this exercise? Don't know. So I quote knew it, unquote, but I didn't get it.
Yeah.
I didn't understand it.
And you're laughing about this and talking about it in the past tense. So take us to when did it change? What was the difference?
When it changed was when I read a book by Louis Gifford called Aches and Pains. And that just was like a bolt from the blue for me. And that was like the grand unifying theory of everything. That it was like, that's why, all of these things sort of don't seem to fit together. And that's why sometimes, something works for someone and doesn't work for someone else who seems exactly the same. And so what I learned from Louis Gifford was pain neurophysiology, or basically pain science. And what I learned, which I had never learned before, was that pain is an output of the central nervous system, and you basically have a pain system in your body, which is basically, it's just your brain and spinal cord, and there's some physiology involved as well as in neurotransmitters and hormones and things. But basically pain, I had always thought of pain as a simple, inevitable result of biomechanical factors, right? If something rubs on something too hard, or if something pulls too hard or squishes something or whatever, therefore pain, right? So if you have pain, therefore something's pulling or rubbing or whatever, in the wrong way, right? So therefore, what do we need to do to change the biomechanics to fix that, right? So I just thought of it as a simple linear process of A plus B, therefore C, tissue plus biomechanical fault, therefore pain,
Yep.
And so I'm like, well, why the fuck, if I correct the biomechanical fault, why doesn't the pain go away? And why does it go away for this person but not for that other person? And so it just didn't make sense to me. But when I read Louis Gifford, it opened my brain to the concept that pain is its own thing. Pain is not an inevitable result of tissue damage or status. It is related to tissue status and so many other things. that probably tissue status is in our situation as people who deal with musculoskeletal aches and pains, sore backs and sore necks and hip replacements and whatever. In our situation, tissue status is probably one of the smaller influences on pain. Probably, I'm just making up a number here, right? But probably contributes to roughly 20%, of the variability of like, do you have pain or not, or how much pain do you have, right? 20% of that equation is what's going on with the tissues. And so what's the other 80%, and I learned this, I think the model that I described for, the linear model of pain that I had of, A plus B, therefore C is like, tissue plus damage equals pain, or tissue plus, incorrect biomechanics equals pain. That's what I now think of as the biomedical model or the biomechanical model. And that was the prevalent model. By model, I just mean like thought process that basically explains, what we observe to be in the world, right? So it's a model of how pain works. And that was the prevailing model in the medical system, all through the 19th century up until kind of the late 20th century. The early 1990s was when like the cutting edge sort of scientists were starting to think, oh, maybe this doesn't really explain, like things very well, and maybe there's a better model. But really it was kind of mainstream. It sort of fell out of fashion in the mainstream of science about the turn of the 21st century. So about the early 2000s. And what has replaced it is something called the biopsychosocial model. And what the biopsychosocial model says is that pain is an emergent property. So pain is not a direct result of any one or two or three things. Pain is an emergent output of the nervous system, central nervous system, in response to perception of threat. And so you can have pain without an injury. Like, we've all, stubbed our toe and then like hella pain, right? And then after you hop around and swear for a couple of minutes, you look at your toe, it's perfectly fine. Or headache, or wake up in the morning with some random ache or pain, 10 minutes later, gone, right? So like pain, it's very possible to have pain without, or just like if you sit perfectly still in whatever position you're sitting right now, maintain that for an hour, do not move, right? You will be in pain, right? But then move, you'll be fine, no injury, right? So it's very possible to have pain without injury. And the thing that actually blew me away when I learned about it was this thing called phantom limb pain. That something like 85% of amputees, so people who have a limb amputated, something like 85% of them experience pain in their amputated limb after it's gone, right? So this is someone with no knee who's got terrible knee pain, right? But they don't have a knee, right? So it's like you can have pain without an injury. You can have pain without a tissue, right? You can have knee pain without a knee. So that just blew my mind. And so I'm thinking like, right, well, if you can have knee pain without a knee, well, where is the pain? Where is the pain? Well, it's not in the knee, right? Because we can chop the knee off and that doesn't take the pain away, right? And this is amazing. Like some of these phantom limb pain stories are amazing. So people get their same like arthritic knee pain that's even worse in the cold weather and all the rest of it, but they don't have a knee anymore. It's crazy. Crazy. And this is a very normal thing. Like the vast majority of amputees experience, phantom limb pain. So pain is not in the tissues. Pain is in the brain, right? And that's not to say we imagine pain or we make up pain or anything like that. It's just it's a physiological fact. Pain is an experience that occurs in the brain, right? If you were a brain in a vat, you could have knee pain or back pain, right? You don't need a knee or a back to have pain in those areas, because pain is an experience that you have in the brain. And so, the brain, is also called the central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord, the central nervous system. And so pain is an experience generated by the brain. And because of that, anything that influences the brain can influence pain, right? So when you're tired, right, you're more sensitive to pain. When you're stressed, you're more sensitive to pain. When you're run down, you're more sensitive to pain. When you are in an immunocompromised state, when you have more systemic inflammation. All of these things and many more of things can contribute to increasing the sensitivity of your brain and your central nervous system to pain. And so if you have a sensitized central nervous system, your brain is in a state where it's on high alert and it's very worried about threats, okay, then a small change in the tissues, like stubbing your toe or getting a minor inflammation in your low back or something, can be interpreted by your brain as a ginormous, big disaster. And you can experience like crippling pain. But then we do an MRI and it's like, no, there's nothing wrong there. It's perfectly fine. There's a tiny, if we squint really hard, maybe there's a tiny little thing in there, but it's like, basically there's nothing that explains the level of pain you have. And so the difference is, why was I doing one thing, stabilizing someone's spine and fixed it? And then another person comes in with the exact same symptoms, exact same posture, the exact same everything. And I do the exact same exercise. It doesn't fix it. Well, the difference is the level of sleep and stress and systemic inflammation and, all of those other things that were influencing those people's central nervous systems that I had completely and utterly failed to address and completely ignored. So it's like, there's the tissue status, which is, like I said, just pulling a number out of the air, 20% of the influence is like, I'm focusing 100% of my attention on the tissue status, right? And completely ignoring everything else that contributes to pain. It's like, oh, why does it sometimes not work? Well, fucking duh. Of course. I'm lucky it ever works,
Great. So how did that affect so at this stage, let's put it on a timeline. At this stage, have you started your education business separate to the Pilates and yoga business by this stage?
This was around about 2015, 2016. So it was like about the same time that I sold the studio and we started Breathe Education as a standalone company, probably a little bit before, like the year before maybe.
Okay. And so the mission of Breathe Education, when it was baked into your Pilates studio, if I'm remembering and assuming correctly, would have been essentially to create instructors for the business.
Oh yeah, we started Breathe Education in 2009. We started training instructors, and we really had no intention of turning it into a proper business or making money out of it. It was like literally, we've got this studio that's a hungry beast that needs lots of instructors because instructors, move and change and get pregnant and whatever. So you need, and also the business was growing, and so we just needed more and more instructors to drive the machine.
It's probably worth remembering too that in 2009, the Pilates industry in Australia wasn't what it is in 2022. So there weren't people training left, right, and center. And it's a thing now that you can be a Pilates instructor. It wasn't that in the same way then as it is now.
No.
So, yeah.
When I look on Instagram and I see I follow this page called Retro Sydney, and they've got photos of Sydney in the 1960s and 70s and early 80s. And I think all those old Holdens and things and people walking around in their polyester suits and, all that. Yeah, that's kind of what it was like when we started teaching.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So, but then that shift, so you did start it essentially to feed the instructor demand of that business.
Yeah.
And there was a fork in the road. Talk to us about that, because that was really the point, wasn't it? Where you went from running the business, needing instructors, and having a lot of contact with that part of the business. Then you became an educator, essentially.
Yeah, well, I think I progressively became more and more interested in the education side and less interested in the running the studio side, to the point where at the end of 2015, I realized I really didn't want to run the studio anymore. And there's more complex reasons behind that, and maybe that will be a subject of a different conversation. But I think what's germane to us today is that I basically realized at the end of 2015 that I was feeling really burnt out and I didn't want to continue to run the studio. And I was on holiday for the Christmas break and I was not looking forward to going back. In fact, I was dreading it. And I was like, this is crazy. I built this fucking business and now I don't want to go back to it. It's like, whose business? I built it. Like, I can't blame anyone for it being some way that I don't want it to be, because it's like, that's me. But I was like, well, why don't I want to do this thing anymore? And in talking with my wife, basically, I realized that I just wanted to teach. I didn't want to run studios anymore. I'd run studios for a decade, run my own studio for a decade. I run other people's studios for like 3 or 4 years before that. And I felt like I'd done that and I'd had done enough of it, and I didn't feel like there was anything more for me there, and that's not where my passion was anymore. And I felt like, my wife said, well, if you could do anything, what would you do? I'd sell the studio and just start an education business. And she's like, well, you've already got a freaking education business, you idiot. I'm like, oh yeah. So we sold this, my share of the studio to my partners, bought out the education company, which was a tiny sub business of the studio. And just started Breathe Education in April 2016, April the 1st, 2016. That's when we first started it. Like up until then, it was just totally a hobby business. It was totally a hobby. At that point, that's when it became like my sole focus.
Okay. And what was when the business was the focus, but so what were you going to teach? Why did you want to be a teacher?
I've always been, I don't know why, but I always just, as soon as I learn something, I want to implement it. I want to teach it to people. So like anything I learned from Melanie, I would just go and teach it the next day to someone else. Or I would use it on my clients the next day, and I think I've been very lucky that that's kind of naturally how I do things, because I've actually since learned that is a very effective way of mastering
What's that
stuff.
called again? It's got a name, I think. Is it practice testing?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
But just reading the book doesn't really do much. But if you read the book and then do the things that you learned by reading the book, that does something.
Yeah.
So I've always, and for me, it was not just doing, but it was also teaching it to other people. And I found that teaching something to other people really makes you clarify your own thinking, and is an incredibly powerful, possibly the most powerful way of learning something, is to try and teach it to someone else, because you think you get it, but then when you try and explain it to someone else, you realize you really don't fucking get it, and you can't explain it simply. And so in the process of trying to explain it something simply, you have to really get clear on what it is that you have learned and how to express that. So yeah, I've always found that really valuable, and I'm just fascinated by the process of transferring knowledge and people, learning and growing, and that whole process I find intrinsically satisfying and interesting. And I just over the years found it more and more so. And so when I started Breathe Education in 2016, like for reals, it was a business, definitely, but it was a passion project. I really felt I had this like exciting knowledge that I wanted to share. I was like, I can't believe there are people who don't know this. They have to know this. It's amazing. So I really, and that's still how I feel. But I felt like fuck. It took me like, what was that, 2015? That was like since I did my personal training qualification in like 1998 or something. It was basically a 15-year. I mean, I'm a bit hazy on the exact timeline, but let's call it 15 years journey to learn, all of the anatomy and the biomechanics, and then finally learn the pain science and go, that's the missing piece. And I want to be clear, pain science doesn't replace anatomy and biomechanics. It's the part of the puzzle, right? And it's the part that you put in and go, now I can see the picture, right? So anatomy and biomechanics is still there. It's still really important. And I'm still fascinated by it. I still love teaching it, and I still love learning about it and thinking about it. But it's not the whole picture, So that was the insight. Like it's the whole person, right? So if you think about pain is a complex multifactorial phenomenon. It's an output of the brain, right? And so the brain calculates, is there a threat? Okay, so there's a change in the tissues, in the low back or in the knee or whatever. Is that a threat? Is that something I need to be concerned about? Okay. And the brain makes that calculation based on multiple factors. Okay. How sleepy am I? How run down am I? How fit am I? What's the level of inflammation? What's the level of blood glucose? What's my body temperature? Have I experienced this sensation before? What was the context? How did that turn out? Like, so many factors, come into play. And so you have, you have to address the whole person, right? So if someone comes in with back pain, you don't ask them about their sleep or their stress or their diet or their general level of exercise or their general health. It's like, well, you've got very little chance of helping that person because, you're being like the blind man and the elephant, you just focus on one tiny little bit of it. And so that was the chief insight, like of all of the things that I've learned that have been amazing and exciting and, I'm really grateful for. This is the biggest one, is that pain is a whole person situation, right? You have to address the whole person, and that even when we do exercises that are seemingly highly specific, like activating someone's left L4-5 multifidus 25% or something, which I've, putting my hand up right now, been there, done that, taught people how to do
that one. Yep.
Yeah. We think we're doing something really specific, but in reality, it's almost certain that the effects of exercise on pain are much more general. So when we do exercise, we think, we activated the multifidus, therefore we realigned the vertebra, therefore it's more stable, therefore the back pain bent. But we didn't think about the fact that when they exercised, we reduced their systemic inflammation and we improved their sleep and we improved their anxiety and we improved their depression and we gave them hope and we had a therapeutic interaction with a concerned person who seems to care and like them, So all of these extraneous factors that are more systemic and are more global in their effect. And you could have the same effect by doing bicep curls for back pain or going for a walk for back pain or doing heavy deadlifting for back pain. And in fact, these experiments have been done and the jury is in. And yes, all of those things work equally well for back pain, right? And so exercise is beneficial for back pain. There's no doubt about that, right? It's really clear that it is beneficial. But which sort of exercise you do doesn't really seem to matter. They all basically work the same. So, and the reason is it's the effects of exercise are not specific, right? It's not about what's happening to the muscle or the tendon or the disc or the whatever when you exercise. It's about the systemic effects like inflammation reducing and improving sleep and mental health and self-efficacy and social interactions and hope and expectation, all of these other things that are generic, they're general effects of exercise. So it's a whole person thing. We have to address the whole person. Now, asterisk, of course, sometimes it is important to strengthen certain parts. Like if you've had surgery or whatever, there's physical rehabilitation that needs to happen. Okay. So of course that's a thing, but I'm talking about for someone with basically garden variety backache or,
where there's no current injury that's in rehab. Yep.
Right. So that was the big revelation that I had. And then so I basically structured the company to try and explain that to people. And with varying degrees of success. And as you recall, Heath, like we ran the diploma, which was basically this was our course that we were going to teach. We were teaching people this stuff. At the start, it wasn't that successful. I think either commercially, it wasn't successful commercially, and it was so unsuccessful commercially that we actually stopped running it. We cancelled it, but it was also not that successful, like educationally. And I remember you and I have had this conversation a bunch of times where we would get right through the whole diploma and then someone on the last day would say, what exercise should I do for someone with a disc bulge? And we would be like, face palm, like,
we failed you.
Yeah. You haven't received the transformation. You haven't experienced the transformation that we need you to experience. Yeah.
And I mean, part of that, I think, just we think about like, I'm not hearing a lot of it in your story, and maybe that's because of the kind of emergent way that you came to it. But certainly I hear this and I see this and talk about it with plenty of instructors, that there's something about being a Pilates instructor that's like you're obligated to be almost like a proto-physiotherapist or a proto-exercise physiologist without having done the university degree. It's like there's an expectation that you know a lot, and then the same problem happens as you've just described, where everything I've done from all my workshops and training and I apply it doesn't give me a reliable output, doesn't give me a reliable outcome. So do I need to go and do more workshops? Do I need to do another course?
Right.
And people pile up the workshops and courses, and sounds like in some cases even pile up university degrees, and still don't have that sense of, So is that you've had this revelation, and it's confirmed by experience and by evidence? You said the jury's out. So, and that's what underpins what you now call the diploma at Breathe Education. Or is it all of the courses at Breathe?
Yeah, so you're right and that was my experience, that people, and this is my personal experience as well, that basically, searching for the answer, in the next weekend certification or the next, qualification or whatever, and then learning like cool, interesting shit, but then just still feeling like I didn't know what the fuck I was doing because I would do my cool, interesting shit that I learned, and sometimes it would work and sometimes it wouldn't. And I was like, oh, fuck, it worked great when the instructor did it on the course. Like, why isn't it working when I do it? I'm pretty sure I'm doing the same thing. And I see that a lot. That's what I see with our students. And that is basically the person who enrolls in the diploma is somebody who feels like maybe they kind of should know it, but they don't get it. And I think, like you say, it's that kind of, a lot of Pilates instructors feel a pressure. And I think actually the pressure doesn't come from clients. It comes from inside ourselves.
Agreed. Yeah.
But a lot of people feel a pressure to know all the answers. So when the client says, why does my hip hurt in this exercise? The Pilates instructor is like, well, fuck, I don't know, but I guess I should know, And so I want to be able to say, oh, well, it hurts because of A, B, and C. So if you, flex your big toe 10 degrees more when you're doing that exercise, that'll solve it for you. And the client will go, oh, great. Thanks. You've just solved my problem. But that's not Pilates instructors' experience. They're like, fuck, I don't know why your hip hurts. Why don't we just do some ab work instead and not worry about it? So I think a lot of instructors feel basically unable to be authentic with their clients because they kind of feel like they should know these things, but they don't. And therefore they don't want to admit that they don't know. They don't want to say to their client, yeah, you know what? I've got no fucking clue why your hip hurts when you do that exercise. So what they do instead is they kind of mumble something, or they just give them a different exercise that sort of avoids loading that body part, or they, or they, change to a different position or whatever. So, which is not a bad thing. I'm not having a go. That was me, that was me. But I think that prevents people from feeling authentic because they're feeling like they're kind of faking it because they kind of are.
Yeah.
And I think the fundamental shift that comes, that came for me and that we now see in our students is that, well, there are two things. One is like, well, there is some stuff that you can actually learn that actually does make sense of this experience for you, right? So when you understand pain neurophysiology, when you understand biomechanics, when you understand, strength training and, a bunch of different things, you can make sense of why does my hip hurt in this exercise, right? And you can go, well, why don't you do it this way instead? And the client can go, oh yeah, that feels a lot better. So there is actually an answer to that a lot of the time. Okay. So that's part of it. It's like, okay, well, maybe you learned a lot of things like I did, but maybe you didn't learn a coherent framework for joining all of the dots together of the things and seeing the forest, not just the trees, So that's one thing. And the second thing is the notion that, of us Pilates instructors as fixers, shifts to us as guides or coaches or collaborators. And so the thing is, you don't need to know all the answers. You don't need to know all the answers. And when you can let go of needing to know all the answers and go, I can be a fucking awesome instructor and deeply and profoundly help my clients without knowing all the answers, all of a sudden this massive weight lifts up off your shoulders and you're like, oh, this is fun again. This is really good. And your client can say to you, why is my hip hurting this? And you can be like, yeah, I don't know. Let's check that out, right? Let's figure it out together, right? Tell me more about when your hip hurts. Let's try it this way. Let's try it this way. And you can explore and experiment. What do you think that means? Why do you think that happens? And so you can, and there are like, it's not just a random thing. You learn specific techniques and strategies on how to problem solve with the client and how to collaborate with the client so that you come down off your sort of like pedestal of being the person who knows everything and has all the answers, which you don't really. And that's why you feel like you're faking it because no one knows all the answers. Like humanity doesn't know all the answers, right? So no wonder you don't fucking know all the answers. But you come down off your pedestal and you stand next to the client and you're like, yeah, this is a bit of a head scratcher, isn't it? Let's try and figure it out. And so all of a sudden it's fun and you're collaborating with the client and you can be genuine. And because you're not pretending to know something that you think you should know, the client doesn't give a fuck if you know it or not. Like it's actually just all stuff that you were putting on yourself. And that was my experience. And that's the experience that I've heard repeated dozens, scores, possibly hundreds of times from students who've gone through the diploma.
Yeah. So, I mean, what I've heard, and I think what you're talking about is there's two outcomes that seem to be really powerful as a result of the course that's been built, which is a way of learning anatomy that is empowering. So it's not just a pile of facts that then, like you said about TFL, you know it, but you can't see it. It's actually the other way. It's more you can see it in your mind, but even if you can't remember the details, that's cool because you can kind of, you understand it rather than you can recite it. And that's incredibly empowering as an instructor, which you've done over the course of 15 years, countless hours of reading, multiple courses, including 2 university degrees, so that the knowledge is there, but then you've found a way to make it a picture in your mind, and your passion is to share that. When that's shared, people feel that same empowerment that you've spent more than a decade building. But then the other part is this understanding that pain it's not a light switch system. It's an emergent multifactorial system that no one can have all the answers to. And once you're aware of the factors, then with a few things, there are some things to learn about loading and appropriate times and healing, etc. But once those things are kind of bedded down, it's empowering in the sense that you're working with the client as a person who's active in the process rather than you having to be the keeper of the answers. And that's liberating. And so on one hand, you've got this incredible confidence in your knowledge, and you're also able to say, I don't know, with a great freedom and joy, essentially, when you're working with a client, which is, of course, empowering for the client. That's what I've seen in a number of students, countless students, actually. Is that what you're describing?
Yeah. You and I both learned anatomy from the same person, Dr. Gerald Cezadlo. And, when I learned anatomy at uni, I learned it what I now think of as the bad way, which is the way I think it's almost universally taught, which is just a long, droning list of muscle actions, origins, insertions, innervations, blood supply, blah, 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 blah. And, my anatomy lecture at uni was 3 hours twice a week. And we must have done 60 muscles or something in the first lecture. It was fucking crazy. And it's after the first 3, I was totally glazed over.
Out.
I was tapped out. And I thought, fuck, how am I going to remember this in 15 years, when I'm teaching or whatever? I can't even remember it right now. I literally just learned it 15 seconds ago. It's already gone. And I just thought, this is terrible. I can't do this. I thought I'm really dumb or something. And so I was searching around this was 2012, 2013, something. So YouTube was a thing. So I was searching around on YouTube, to try and find some person that would teach me anatomy, and I found Dr. Gerald Cezadlo, and he was a lecturer in anatomy at the College of St. Scholastica in Duluth, Minnesota. And he taught Anatomy 101, Anatomy 201, Anatomy 301, Anatomy 401. And so basically he taught a whole 4-year physiology degree, including pathophysiology, embryology, everything. And he just put his lectures online. And this is a college where he was teaching nursing students, medical students, physiotherapy students, this is a legit proper university anatomy physiology degree. He just put his lectures online for free. And so we didn't have any slides or any textbook, but we just had his audio lectures, which were kind of crackly quality because he's not a super techno savvy guy. But as you know, Heath, Doc C, which is what he calls himself and what everyone calls him, just a fucking inspired teacher, gifted teacher, and really, really understands anatomy. The man knows anatomy. And he taught us, you and me, anatomy from, what is a cell, what is a organ, what is a tissue, all the way up to like the function of the nephron in the kidneys, to what is a nerve impulse, to, like freaking everything. And he did that without any visual aids, like just in audio lectures. And I went through a 3-year bachelor's and a 2-year master's or 18-month master's. I did it in the whole lot in 3 years. And after that first week of anatomy, I did not go to a single anatomy lecture at either university. I just listened to Doc C, because an anatomy curriculum is universal, right? So first year anatomy in medicine in Duluth, Minnesota is the same as first year anatomy in exercise science in Melbourne, Australia. Like it's,
right.
The body's the body, and so the curriculum is basically the same. And so I just literally listened to Doc C's lectures, and I passed like my 4-year degree. I got distinctions in 3 subjects and high distinctions in the other 15. And this was just from like, I literally didn't attend a single lecture or tutorial at my university on anatomy. I just learned it all from Doc C. And he has just this brilliant way of teaching that, you and I have both adopted a lot of his methods and his mannerisms. But he taught me to make a picture that to understand anatomy is to make a picture in your mind of what's happening inside the body. And, that simply memorizing lists of trivia has got nothing to do with understanding how the body works. And like, I now understand after learning from Doc C, I mean, oh my God, that man I'm so grateful to him. Like, I really want to, at some point I'm going to fly to Duluth, Minnesota and
shake his
buy him
hand.
dinner or something. Because he really has just profoundly influenced my life and my teaching. And through that, I've been able to influence other people by using his teaching methods. And he taught me that if you don't understand anatomy, if you've struggled to learn anatomy, it's not you, it's that you were taught wrong. You were taught by just someone droning on muscle origin, action, insertion, blah, 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 and that is just lists of trivia. It doesn't mean anything. And so learning anatomy means making a picture in your mind, an anatomically accurate picture in your mind. And you don't need to remember any of the names of any of the parts. You just need to make a picture in your mind of where the muscle is, where's the muscle start, where's the muscle end, what's the direction of the fibers, right? You don't have to know any of the names of those parts, but you just have to make a picture in your mind, and then you have to be able to make that muscle contract and see what happens, and then you can figure shit out. You don't have to remember what the action of the muscle is. It's just obvious, like it pulls that and that together, like that's easy. So that was such a profound shift for me. And that's now, as you know, the way that we teach anatomy. And I think that is why we're able to deliver that like post-grad level spinal biomechanics to someone 2 months into the course, is because we're not memorizing lists of trivia. We're making pictures in our mind, and people actually fucking get it. It's not like I learned, quote, remembered anatomy. It's like, oh, I get it. I can see, like you can look with your x-ray vision, and when the client moves their arm or their back or their knee, you can see what's happening inside. You can picture the muscles and the tendons and the ligaments and the discs and all of the things moving, and you can just problem solve it and figure it out. Oh, if there's pain there, what tissue would that be? What's pulling on that? You can actually just problem solve because it makes sense to you. And it's like that, like, oh yeah, I could go on for ages about Doc C,
and I think one of the things you're touching on there, and as part of that, certainly was my experience when we discovered Doc C and I spent time with him, was what I had thought was anatomy was lists of trivia, and that at some point I would get enough of it and things would make sense in movement. But then the shift was, seeing it in your mind, like you've just described so eloquently, was I don't even need to know the name. I can just imagine that point by that point drawn together must be a rubber band that goes from those 2 points. And then I can start to think about movements much more effectively. And if that bone is there in this movement, then a different set of rubber bands will be active than if the same bone is over there in that movement. And that's, so I think the paradox maybe for a lot of people in the Pilates world is we often hear people say, I want to know more anatomy. It's like, you probably know enough anatomy. What you need is some insight on how to think about anatomy.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I think it's always interesting and exciting to learn more anatomy, but I think, when I learn anatomy these days, I do it by looking at pictures and sitting and thinking. I have a really beautiful anatomy textbook that has beautiful pictures in it, and I just flick through it, find a bit that I'm interested in. Oh, the anatomy of the jawbone or the whatever, and you just look at it and go, fuck, that's amazing. And you look at where the muscles are and you imagine, if that muscle contracts, what's going to happen, and as the jaw moves this way, what's going to happen to that muscle, and you just think about it, and it starts to make sense, and you can see how it works. Yeah.
So you're clearly passionate about education, and by education we mean what you've always done, which is as soon as you learn something that you think's important, you want to share it with as many people as you can. And you're clearly passionate about anatomy, and you're clearly passionate about movement, and specifically Pilates movement. Tell us just what are people? You've talked about the diploma course. So what's your vision for the diploma? Like, it's expressing these passions. What do you want people to get? What's your mission? What are you trying to deliver?
Well, when I did my degrees, basically it's a 4-year fucking forced indoctrination into the benefits of exercise. Like, they just made you read paper after paper after paper after paper on like why exercise is so awesome for everyone, and everyone should be exercising.
These are scientific papers.
Yeah, scientific research papers. And they make you read all the guidelines and all of the textbooks. And it's all basically just saying everyone must start exercising right now.
Yesterday. Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, exercise truly is the elixir of life. It basically, think of any, aspect of human well-being, flourishing and health, and it basically improves it. Whether it's like Alzheimer's or heart disease or mental health or, like back pain or Parkinson's or multiple sclerosis, cancer. Like, exercise is not necessarily the answer, but it improves outcomes, it improves quality of life, it improves length of life for basically anyone. So it's like, oh my God, exercise is so freaking awesome. And it's free. You can just go for a walk. You can do some push-ups in your lounge room. You can do some hundreds or whatever. And so I just am so passionate that to share that, because I think not knowing that costs people a decade of their life.
Yeah.
And so I think it's so powerful and so important to understand that. Like, meeting the physical activity guidelines reduces your chance of dying of any cause by almost 50% in the next decade, right? Like, it's crazy, like, that people don't know this and people don't meet the physical activity guidelines. So I learned that over, 2 degrees, and they made us read a bazillion papers on it, right? And then we learned all the biomechanics, and now I've learned all this pain science and stuff. But another thing, another sort of thing about me, I think it's just part of my personality, is I like to always make things better. And I think a lot of people listening to this are the same. But, like, if I can do something, I'm like, okay, how can we make it quicker? How can we make it better? How can we make it easier? How can we make it more streamlined? And so I think, well, I did that degree in 3 years, right? It's a 4.5-year degree I did in 3 years. Well, there was a lot of shit in that degree that I found totally useless, right? So we did, like I said, 2 semesters on ECG leads, right? So when someone has a heart attack and they go in, or a chest pain or whatever, they go into a cardiac rehab clinic and they put you on a treadmill and they shave your chest and they put 12 lead ECG on you to measure your cardiac rhythm or arrhythm. Okay. So we did like a whole year on that, right? I'd forgotten 90% of it now because I wasn't that interested, but I learned, how to read an ECG and how to interpret a sinus rhythm versus whatever. And it's like, I could have done without that. If they'd left that out of the course, I would have been just as happy, right? And then we did this whole unit on ergonomics, which it turns out is total bullshit and doesn't do anything, and that was a semester. Well, that was fucking, 250 hours of blood, sweat and tears I could have lived without, And then there was, this other unit, or the history of the Psychological Association of the United States or something that we did for Psychology 101. It's like, well, do you really need to know that to be an effective exercise,
Facilitator, yeah.
No, I think you could live without it, So there was all of these, things that were like, we could chuck that out and chuck that out and chuck that out. And it would actually make the course better, in my view. And I was like, what if we chucked out all of the things, right? How short could we make that course, right? And just get all of the really good stuff in there. And it turns out you can get it down to about a year, right? If you chuck out all of the boring shit. Like if you take a 4-year physiotherapy degree, right? Like that's amazing. They learn all these cool shit, but they learn like cardiopulmonary, they learn working in ICU, they learn neuro rehabilitation, they learn spinal manipulation, they learn massage, they learn all of these things. They learn electrotherapy. It's like, well, what if you didn't want to learn any of those things and you just wanted to learn how to give exercise to people, right? Could we cut out 3 of those years and teach someone just how to do it? And it turns out, yes, you can, because that's what we do. So basically, the moment of revelation came to me when I was reading the American College of Sports Medicine's guidelines to exercise testing and prescription, which was the textbook for both of my degrees, the undergraduate and the postgraduate, and is now, as you know, the textbook for our diploma of clinical Pilates. And the ACSM's guidelines for exercise testing and prescription is freaking brilliant, because it's basically it tells you how to give exercise to apparently healthy adults and then people with all kinds of medical conditions. So if you're an exercise physiologist working in a cardiac rehab ward and someone's just had a myocardial infarction, a heart attack 3 days ago, you pull out your ACSM guide and you prescribe them exercise accordingly. If you're working in a hospital with someone with Parkinson's or multiple sclerosis or atherosclerosis or diabetes or hip replacement or scoliosis or osteoporosis or back pain or cancer, or it tells you what is the exercise guideline for each of those people. And so it's just a fantastic, incredible resource. And but I'm reading through it, and they make you read it. They make you read it every chapter. And then I'm reading every chapter, and every chapter it says the exercise prescription for people with diabetes is the same as the exercise prescription for healthy adults. I'm like, oh, okay, great. And the exercise prescription for people with cancer is the same as the exercise prescription for people with healthy adults. For healthy adults, the exercise prescription for people with low back pain is the same as the exercise prescription for healthy adults. The older adults is the same as for healthy adults. People with multiple sclerosis, same as healthy adults. I'm like, hold on a sec.
Where are these healthy adults?
Yeah, and I'm like, well, this is all the fucking same. So we used to do this. I started doing this thing at the end of the diploma, which was like Masters in Exercise Physiology on one whiteboard screen. And it was like, I would write out all of these conditions: multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, low back pain, heart disease, stroke, whatever it might be. And like, what's the exercise prescription? And it would just be like, same as healthy adults, same as healthy adults, same as healthy adults. But I thought, and that was kind of a joke, right? But then I thought, well, it's kind of a joke, but it's true. So we actually started just building it into the program, and I realized that it's like, you don't need to learn 99 things, right? You just learn one thing and you can apply it to 99 people. And the prescription for cancer is basically the same as for healthy adults, with 1 or 2 or 3 little tweaks, right? Same for Parkinson's disease or arthritis or whatever. It's not exactly the same, but it's like 98% the same, right? So you start from the basis of going, yeah, we're basically going to give the same thing to everyone because that's the default, and then we might tweak it a bit based on preference and condition and whatever. So yeah, I just realized you can be as effective. I think we train people to be more effective than the degrees I did. The people we turn out of the diploma are more effective than I was when I finished my degree, because I didn't learn the pain science stuff in my degree. And when I did my degrees, they never pointed out to me oh yeah, these are all just the ACSM recommendations for every frickin' condition are the fucking same. They didn't point that out to me.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if they realized it themselves. They were just treating each thing as a separate thing. It's like, what's the prescription for diabetes? Blah, 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 GLUT4 proteins, blah, 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 blah. But it's just the same. It's the same. And it astounds me that people didn't see that pattern, or if they did, they ignored it. And yeah, so I guess I've just really tried to, and I think we've succeeded finally. We've tried to take all of, like, if you want to be expert at assessing and, programming exercises for people with musculoskeletal pain, what are the things you need to know to be exceptionally good at that, and throwing out everything else, right? And just jamming all of that into the shortest possible space of time. And that turns out to be 1 year. And it's kind of bursting at the seams a little bit, but you can learn that in 1 year. You can go from, I know shit about shit and I feel like a fake, and I feel like I should know these things, and I've got all this knowledge in my head from the 1,000,001 Weekend certifications, but I don't see the forest. And people ask me a question, why does my shoulder hurt when I do this? And I don't fucking know, and I just have to mumble something or pretend. You can go from that to, like, I really know my shit, and I can genuinely, confidently, and expertly help anyone with literally any medical condition, ache or pain or injury, and some of those people are going to be referred off to the emergency room or whatever. But basically, I can confidently engage with every single person with any kind of symptom or injury or diagnosis or whatever. And that can be a genuine confidence based on actual skill and understanding and knowledge that you are working within current accepted best practice. That whole journey is 1 year, So I think we've done pretty good, because for me, it took 15 plus years.
Yeah. And now someone can do it in a year and come out more confident than you were after all of that study.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel, and we've so learned from our mistakes along the way. Like, it wasn't, like the original diploma, like I said, we had people that we failed, they got to the end of the program. They didn't have that transformation. But I think these days, we don't have 100% success rate, but pretty darn close. Like, basically,
become clearer on what we're trying to achieve too. It used to be that we were trying to do a whole lot of studio apparatus equipment training as well as doing this. And, we've sort of gotten better at what's the important stuff to work on, seeing the similarities and working on the things that are overlapping. And
right. Because we used to think of the diploma as like we were working within the constraints of when we were affiliated with the PMA and the Pilates Alliance of Australasia and stuff. And they had sort of rules about you have to teach these certain exercises and blah, blah, blah. And so we wanted to be quite legit. And then, we actually realized that actually all of that repertoire and stuff was not core to the mission of becoming an expert and deeply skilled and confident at working with people with injuries. And that, in fact, that was just essentially like opportunity cost we were losing, and so that's some of the stuff that we've thrown out. Now, we still teach that stuff in a separate course now, but again, I think it's much better. Undoubtedly, it's 1,000%
yeah, without a question. Yeah.
We just and it's great because, like, we don't give a shit if you are trained in Polestar or Stop Pilates or Bassi or Peak or Power Pilates or Club Pilates. We don't give a shit. Like, come and join the diploma, and you don't even have to know the Cadillac or the barrels, because everything's mat work and reformer. And, like, even if you don't know reformer, that's fine. Like, everything's like, there's always mat work options in every thing that we do. So basically, we're not teaching you any repertoire. You just come as someone who knows some repertoire from some system, and we don't give a shit what system that is. We're going to give you a framework for thinking about how to apply that repertoire to maximize somebody's recovery and functional capacity. So it's like I think we've progressively over the years we've thrown out more and more and more, and every time we throw out stuff, it gets better. Because we've just whittled it right down to what you truly need to know to be fucking awesome at, helping people with pain and injuries.
Yeah. And that the principles that you get from the course make it exponentially easier to then go and learn and work with apparatus. And I personally feel it's my reflection that a lot of people are taught, and I was one, that it was the specific exercise, or the specific exercise at the specific station on the specific apparatus that was going to have the magical outcome, but it's not. And when you understand the principles that underpin that, then it's like, oh man, I can help that client on an exercise bike, or with a Swiss ball, or with a ladder, or on the mat, or with a reformer. And then it's suddenly the apparatus is unlocked in a sense, rather than it being where it's supposed to be held.
Right. The apparatus just becomes like a simple tool, but you already know what job you need to do. So it's like which tool you use sort of becomes almost immaterial.
Yeah, that's right. And you reach into your toolbox and go, is that going to do the job I want? Yeah, that'll do. Let's do it. Yeah.
Yeah, it becomes one of the less important considerations. Right? You could. I mean, we actually did think about, opening the diploma up to people who are yoga teachers or personal trainers or kettlebell or barbell, powerlifters or whatever, because it really would work totally for any of those people, because it's literally not specific to which apparatus you're on. It's about the principles and the reasoning and the thinking underpinning why you're choosing an exercise or why you're doing something with it.
And the load intensity you're looking for. Yeah.
Right. But we've chosen not to do that because people who are coming from Pilates base have a certain, and of course, people vary, but in the broad brushstrokes, I think people coming from a Pilates base have a certain kind of frame of reference on the world and the body and movement that is not the same as the frame of reference as, say, a personal trainer or a yoga instructor or a kettlebell, person or whatever. So I think that I'm really happy that we've kept it specific to Pilates, although I do, I love hefting a barbell myself. And that, that idea sort of does the siren song, it calls out to me. But I'm really pleased and satisfied and content that we've kept it specific to Pilates, because I feel that by keeping it really specific, we can, like, the course is a transformation. It's a path of transformation from I feel like a fraud and I don't know what the fuck I'm doing to I'm deeply skilled and, justifiably confident, working with an injury. And that's the transformation. And that transformation is much more effective and easier for us to facilitate when everyone's basically starting at the same place. When we're starting with a common set of assumptions and beliefs and, basic kind of, views on the world that most Pilates instructors tend to share. And so it's easier for us to choreograph that journey, I think, because it's Pilates specific.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's a shared language, at least in terms of that basic repertoire. And but I would say, like, even if you do, like, this course is so not about the repertoire. No, correct. Right? So when I said repertoire, I mean basic movements, essentially, and equipment. Yeah.
So if you feel like, oh shit, I did my course a decade ago and I'm rusty as fuck on the repertoire, it doesn't matter. We don't care. That will not be an issue in this course. Like, we're going to use such basic movements and, it doesn't matter. I think it feels like we're kind of almost at an end. But one thing I would just like to kind of, I guess, touch on a little bit more is that like, when I look around the Pilates industry now, I have an outsider's view of every other training organisation. So I'm not affiliated with Stop Pilates anymore. I haven't been for over a decade. I've never been affiliated with Bazzi or Polestar or any of those other ones. So, like, I'm just commenting based on what I see from the outside, and also mostly actually what students have said to me about their experience with other training providers. Now, maybe the students we're getting a super biased sample because the students who go to XYZ company and love it, well, they don't come to us, right? Whereas the ones that go to XYZ company and hate it, then they're like, I'm not going back there. Maybe I'll try breathe. So maybe we're getting a biased sample. So I don't want to throw rocks, but I guess what I want to say is that a lot of people have expressed, like I was talking to Caroline Sawbridge last week, because, we do these exit interviews at the end of every cohort. So we have a cohort, what have we got, like 40, 50 people in every cohort incoming to the diploma. That's like 3 times a year we do that. And then you and I talk to every single person at the end of the cohort like in a half-hour interview and get their detailed feedback. This is like a really in-depth process. It takes us like 2 weeks of 10 hours a week each or something. And I was talking to Caroline Sawbridge, and she's Brit living in the Netherlands. She's a really interesting woman, and she was a standout student. She was awesome. And what really struck me was that she said that basically when she came into the course, like she felt really like she was not a good Pilates instructor, and that when she did her previous training, she felt like she didn't measure up and she wasn't, she was kind of the dumbest person in the room. And that just really surprised me, because I've always thought of her as being like one of the smartest people in the room, and like really picking this shit up really quickly and like going deeper with it and sort of thinking 3 steps ahead of what we learned in the lesson and going, oh, well, if that's the case, what about these other 3 things that we didn't talk about? And like really smart woman. And it just kind of like, it really surprised me. And I said, well, how do why do you think that was? And she said, oh, questions were discouraged in her previous training. And she said, literally, they said, oh, don't ask questions, Caroline, and people were, and I've heard this from her, but also from lots of other students, that people were kind of, I guess belittled is the word that I'm looking for, not physically performing the exercises to some particular aesthetic standard, like not having the flexibility or the whatever, to do the whatever exercise in the particular way. And I just think that is fucking such bullshit. And that, like, in our program, we're the exact opposite of that. Like, we love questions. Questions are an integral part of learning. Making mistakes is an integral part of learning. We are here, for you to learn. That's why we're fucking here, right? So if you've got a question, it's like, we're not fucking done yet. Like that's like, and we don't give a fuck what you look like when you do the exercises. Like, that is not a thing in this program, not a thing. Like, but paradoxically, one of the things that does happen is a lot of people become physically a lot stronger and more flexible as they do this program, because we teach you the physiology of strength training and we teach you how to get really fucking strong so you can get your clients really fucking strong. It's not a requirement of the course that you get strong. It's just a byproduct, right? We're just teaching you how to actually, like, if you're going to spend half an hour working out, how to get the maximum result in that half an hour so you actually build the most physical capacity. So when you're rehabbing someone, they can come and go, holy shit, I'm getting so fucking strong. I can't believe it. It's like, yeah, but, it just drives me bananas that not only are people being taught like ineffectively, like taught anatomy by just droning on, muscles, origin, insertion, actions, and blah, blah, blah. But also people are being actually like actively discouraged from asking questions or being told that they're the wrong shape or whatever to, it's like, it just drives me mad. I hate that shit. And I just think, that is another thing that really, I think we, you particularly, Heath, have built into this program is that empowering people to explore their curiosity and to, we, do those review sessions where we just dive super deep. Yes. Just like, I'm sorry, I'll get off my soapbox, but I'd love to hear just your thoughts on this question.
So, which was the question specifically?
Well, just basically
So are we talking about this? On the one hand, there's the culture of how you look when you do an exercise, and if you can't do it that way, then somehow you're less than, and versus when we apply basic strength training principles over time.
I guess what I'm trying to, incoherently formulate here is the conception of like, well, what is education, and how do you know if you've had a good one, and I guess if you walk away from your training program and thinking you're dumb and the wrong shape, then
Wasn't
that's
a good
not
one.
you. That's not
Yeah.
you.
No. Whereas if you walk away feeling like what you learned is something that you can share with others and you can describe it and it's improving your ability to do the thing that you set out to do, it's probably a better one. So
Right.
if you've come in, so what we promise in the diploma is to give people the skills and the knowledge to confidently help people who are in rehabilitation or living in pain. And as an aside to that, as you apply those principles, what we found is that people discover they can do things with their own body that they had either been told they shouldn't do or had never dreamed they could do. And that's just a complete aside. That's not even one of the lead promises. It's just an overflow of when people lean into the content and start to embody it, that's what happens when you get stronger.
Yeah. And I think that comes with shedding fear of physical movements, and also just like fear of not knowing the answer, fear of making someone worse, fear of not being legitimate. So like I think one of the biggest outcomes is fearlessness.
Yeah.
But that it happens in multiple dimensions, and so like a thing I hear a lot is people saying, I've actually, my life outside of Pilates has changed for the better. I'm happier. I'm more empowered. I'm more fearless. I feel clearer on my purpose and I'm more grateful. And I feel more inspired, and that's none of those things are like things that we deliberately set out to achieve. But I think they're just the result of people actually feeling like they did a really hard thing and now they own that knowledge and that skill. And it's not something that they have to come back to us every 12 months and get a certain number of CEC points to maintain. It's like we actually teach them how to go and update their own knowledge by just searching it on Google Scholar and how to read the research and read guidelines and find guidelines and all of that. And so I think I think that is a core outcome of the course that I feel like I've learned, something I learned from university that's incredibly profound is you can just go and look shit up. That there's a fuckload of research out there for free, like an unimaginable mountain, the size of the planet fucking Jupiter, of research. And if you have a question about how the world works, you can just go and look it up, And so if you're sitting in your Pilates course and someone says, oh, this exercise is bad for your back, and you're wondering, I wonder if that's true. Well, you can just go and look it up.
Yeah.
And it turns out that there's an answer to those questions. And, we teach people how to go find that information. And once you know how to do that, you can go and look up any old shit, like does sunscreen protect you from skin cancer and do seatbelts save lives? And, lots of questions. My mum told me the other week, don't wear your earphones when you're riding your bicycle because you won't hear the cars come and you'll get killed. I'm like, wonder if that's a thing. So when I looked it up, nah. Guess what? Deaf people drive cars. They're just fine. They don't have more accidents than hearing people, right? So it's like, oh, well, I'm going to wear my headphones.
Right. All right. So I feel like we should probably wrap this up, Raph. Thanks for spending your time talking to me about your experience and your journey. If anyone wanted to learn more, what would they do?
I think they'd probably just click some type of magic link that will appear in the show notes.
Okay.
And that'll help them learn more.
Great. And there's a variety of ways they could learn more from those links. So, yeah, great.
This has been fun.
Yeah, thanks, Raph.